One minute. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Jagat Krishna Prabhupada. All glories to our lead speaker for today, His Holiness JANANANDA Swami Maharaj. And all glories to our Samuel Vaishnavi devotees. We thank you all for being here as always. We are very much honored and blessed. We have His Holiness with us today, who will be sharing with us the Nectarian Srimad Bhagavatam. There are a few devotees here at the moment, but we strongly believe devotees will be joining quite shortly. We may not be able to repeat this, but those who are already here, please, if you can, turn on your cameras and turn off your microphones. Mute yourselves so we may attentively hear Maharaj. Maharaj, we are very much grateful that you somehow were able to accept our invitation to be with us today. We are very much grateful. So without further ado, we may put the verse on the screen and you take it over from here. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, nice to be with you again. Many of you are familiar. I've been, I think, for a few months now, quite often having your association. Right now we're situated in, well, at least in external point of view, situated in Sri Vrindavan Dham. We hope we could say the same thing internally. The idea is that we become always absorbed in the mood of Sri Vrindavan, that mood of compassion, that mood of love. Compassion and love are interchangeable. Today we're going to be reading from the third canto, I understand, chapter 14, text 17. If we could screen it, that would be nice. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is the chapter, The Pregnancy of Diti. In the evening, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have a book because here in Vrindavan we don't carry books here, obviously. But I think that's the title of the chapter. And it's text number 17. So I'll just read it through. The time is a little short tonight because I'm in Vrindavan. It's nearly 9 o'clock, almost, no, 8:40 at the moment. At night, so, we have to. And we're planning to go around Govardhan Purtrama tomorrow, so we'll have to see. A little bit earlier than usual tonight. Eshatihang vidasyami priyam miro yadichasi tasya kamam kuryat siddhis traivargiki yataha. Word for word. We can go through the word for word, I think. Let me just reduce the size of these icons here. Eshaha, this, te, your request. Aham, I. Vidashami, shall execute. Of course, this is Kashyapa speaking to his wife Diti. Priyam, very dear. Biru, O afflicted one. Yat, what? Ichasi, you are desiring. Tasyaha, her. Kamam, desires. No, not. Kaha, who. Kuryat, would perform. Siddhihi, perfection of liberation. Tvaivargiki, 3, yataha, from whom, translation. O afflicted one, I shall forthwith gratify whatever desire is dear to you. For who else but you is the source of the 3 perfections of liberation? That's a nice answer from Kashyapa to his wife, but of course, you probably know the story. It didn't quite work out the way Kashyapa, but in a gentle way, was hoping. Purport. The 3 perfections of liberation are religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification. For a conditioned soul, the wife is considered to be the source of liberation because she offers her service to the husband for his ultimate liberation. Conditional material existence is based on sense gratification. And if someone has the good fortune to get a good wife, he is helped by the wife in all respects. If one is disturbed in his conditional life, he becomes more and more entangled in material contamination. A faithful wife is supposed to cooperate with her husband in fulfilling all material desires, so that he can then become comfortable and execute spiritual activities for the perfection of life. If, however, the husband is progressive in spiritual advancement, the wife undoubtedly shares in his activities, and thus both the wife and the husband profit in spiritual perfection. It is essential, therefore, that the girls, as well as the boys, be trained to discharge spiritual duties so that, at the time of cooperation, both will be benefited. The training of the boy is brahmacharya. The training of the girl is chastity. A faithful wife and spiritually trained brahmachari are a good combination for advancement of the human mission. End of purport by Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Pastaya Bhutale, Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane, Namaste Sarasvate Devi, Gauravani Pacharine Nivasesha Sanyavadi Pastichari Shatarni Om Jnana Timurandasya, Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam, Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manovishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Shvayam Rupa Kadamayam Yadati Shvapadantikam Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripasindivyochapanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Can we turn off the fridge? As normal in Vrindavan, there are many various sound vibrations from different directions which inject themselves usually into any endeavor for a conversation. So bear with us if there's some unexpected noises of monkeys jumping on the roof, or fireworks going off, or someone starting a generator outside your front door. All kinds of things happen. It's Vrindavan. You have to simply take shelter of Krishna. So what is this situation, interesting situation, which is evolving here in this historical event, organized, you could say, orchestrated by the supreme will of the Lord? Although it seems like DT is becoming overwhelmed here with incredible lust, her main intention, of course, is she's very much wanting to have a child. Most of her sisters are already born children, and she's childless. Her husband's not so particularly interested. He's more interested in the spiritual path. But nonetheless, it's his duty as a husband to satisfy the wife, as the wife's duty is to satisfy the husband in terms of his needs. They both have same business in one sense, although the details may be different. So to give the wife a child or children is the duty of a husband, basically speaking, in normal events. So the history of this event is there. You've been going through it a little bit up to now, and it will evolve still further. And we all know how it's all part of the Lord's plan for the whole pastime of his appearance as Lord Nrsingadev and Lord Varahadev, and so on to perform wonderful pastimes, both for his own pleasure and the benefit of all those who hear them. So this is a kind of a build-up to this whole episode. And the fact that DT is overwhelmed, the fact that Kashyapa Muni submits to her overwhelming desire is nothing unusual, you could say, in the material world, but it's unusual for a saintly person. We're not going to go into that too much tonight. There's many things in this verse, and purport Prabhupada describes what is mentioned in the verse itself. To fulfill the three constituents of religiosity, a wife is required: practicing religious principles, and economic development, sense gratification. The idea is ultimately doing it in the proper way, that one aims at liberation. At least the husband and the wife follows her. That's normally how it goes. We see in this age we're in, that's probably not the case. But that's how traditionally it was supposed to be in the human form of life, at least amongst those who were what would be called civilized human beings, who understood the purpose of human life. Unfortunately, without understanding the actual purpose of life, there may be some shallow religiosity, some economic development, sense gratification are certainly there, but the understanding of liberation or even the endeavor will be there. Generally, people are just totally entrapped in the material world with very little inclination for anything other than that, trying to extend their sense gratification as much as they can and becoming very entangled in various forms of sense gratification. Their family life may be a disaster also. That's another thing. They still don't give up this pursuit for material sense gratification, although they've got the human form of life, unfortunately. But we see that this is, when done properly, according to Vedic standards, Varnashram system, and so on, the wife can be a great, as mentioned here in the purport, and with the understanding of Kashyap, that the wife can be, basically speaking, the great support for the actual goal of life of liberation, to enable the husband peacefully to practice his spiritual life. That's the idea, not that it's arguing. In tradition, the wife would never criticize the husband, and arguments may rarely take place. They know their duty and they would get along with their services to each other. But nowadays we see that's not generally the case. And the wife, of course, as we mentioned, she's very fortunate. If that's the situation, she gets the equal benefit of her husband wherever he goes, because normally a wife will be very attached to the husband, and the husband acts in such a way that the wife is convinced that he's very attached to her. Again, something which is not necessarily a normal situation in this day and age. And this is the chastity of women. Prabhupada writes in the purport that women's training is chastity. They're trained, and that's one of the reasons that in Vedic society, generally the girls were married at a very young age. And even if they weren't literally living with their husbands until they reached puberty, nonetheless, they knew who their husband was, and they would be serving him from time to time in little ways. He may be already mature, he may not even be practically mature, but the wife will be serving him in various ways, and her mind is fixed on one man. She has no other man in her mind. This is chastity. Our modern society, with all of its education, its intermingling with the sexes, not open sex exactly, but, various types of, on the road, everywhere you go, you see very intimate relationships or intimate dealings between men and women, or even between the same sex nowadays. It's very hard for young people not to be affected by this. I remember Jayapataka Maharaj told me one time when he was in Calcutta, when he first went to Mayapur, the early 70s, he was learning Bengali. He was talking to one Bengali farmer, trying to discuss in Bengali, which he more or less grasped. And he asked the man if he'd ever been to Calcutta, and the man said once. And the man was about 70 years old. He was a little bit surprised. So he asked why. And he said, when I went there, I was shocked. He said, I saw a man holding a woman's hand. He said, I will never go to that sinful place ever again. So we can hardly imagine such a situation where even husband and wife would not hold their hands in public. But nowadays, what can you say? It's a different world that we're living in. There's a place for everything, you could say. So, yeah. What's the purpose of all of this? Of course, liberation isn't just some kind of Mayavad concept of just merging. It's obviously from a devotional point of view, it's attaining our constitutional nature as to who we actually are. And a basic understanding which is lacking in society is that we're not this body. We're all spirit souls. And as spirit souls, our business should be spiritual. But we utilize this material body and mind, and whatever conditional nature we have, according to their nature, we try to utilize for realizing our spiritual identity. We don't deny it. We don't artificially think that we're not the body, therefore we deny the body or deny, let's say, utilize them and to some extent accommodate the needs, at least of the physical and mental bodies, in a way so that they're, pretty as peaceful as you can expect and engage as beneficially as we can for both their material and spiritual objectives in life. But unfortunately, in this age, most people are, basically speaking, absorbed in sex life, sense gratification of various kinds, etc., and they are trapped in what's normally termed, at least by Prahlad Maharaj terms, this is Andakupa, a very deep, dark well, which is very hard to get out of. And there's practically little light down there. And people are just trapped in that situation in darkness, in ignorance, not knowing anything else. And unfortunately, more or less, Shrama Avi Kevalam, more or less wasting their human form of life in the modes of passion and ignorance. Basically, they're victimized by, what can you say, by their own desire in one sense, their karma, and no association to change that course of events. Is by proper association, and association includes environmental circumstances and particularly education. So Prabhupada mentions in his purport the importance of education to facilitate the actual beneficial path of, let's say, family life or society life, occupational life, whatever it is. But training so that we know what we should do, so we're a little bit more at home with where we are and what we're doing, occupation-wise and ashram-wise and so on. The child, at least the boy, would be trained. And because society was expected to be a little bit more, say, down to earth and not so crazy like today where people are so confused. But aside from that, education was a key factor involved here. And the ascertainment of a child's nature would be preliminary to the education, or at least it would be ascertained in the early stages of education as to what nature the child had. And then accordingly, education would be given in an appropriate way according to the child's nature, according to Varna Ashram standards at least. Although we're all eternal spirit souls, nonetheless we're conditioned, and we do have our material conditioning, which we're all struggling with, both mental, maybe physical also, especially on the subtle plane. So many identity crises and occupation crises and relationship crises and every type of crisis you can think of practically is there. Because we're so much, let's say, overwhelmed, trapped in this victimized, whatever you want to call it. We're both victims and victimized. We're all victims of others because we're indulging others in sense gratification. We're therefore causing other, what would we call it? Victimizers? No, I don't know what the word is. Whatever it is, we're causing our other people, they see us as their aggressors or whatever it is. And we're also victims of the circumstances of others imposing their activities upon us. But that's, what can we say? That's due to our lack of understanding of the objective of life and absorbing ourselves in the modes of nature and consequent karma that follows up from there. So basically what we're going to look at tonight is how not to be a victim of this whole thing. Whether we follow that path to some extent, which we try to do, of course, with Varnashram, to whatever extent is realistically possible, or we don't. We still don't want to be a victim of, the modes of nature, a victim of the illusory energy, a victim of our senses, because we should have realized that sense gratification leads to suffering. One of the early statements, I think, well, not so early, maybe the 5th chapter of Gita, where Krishna says, the devotee doesn't take pleasure in these things. One who's wise anyway. We may do a little bit neophyte, but one is a little more mature doesn't, because he realizes their cause is ultimately of distress. You get a little, it's like drugs or something, you get a little bit of a high, but then it becomes a real problem after that. it entangles in this world and leads to so many disappointments and frustrations and so on. We don't take pleasure in those things. They have a beginning and an end. And, maybe in the beginning it's tasty, but when it comes to an end, it's not so tasty. It's quite disturbing. Like that. So these are some of the points of this evening's verse and purport. We can also look at the nature of a woman. Sometimes we hear things how women are more lusty, but that's not understood perhaps quite the same way as we look at lust. Naturally, they're very materialistic. They like security, they like family, they like home, they like comforts, they like material sense enjoyments, probably a little bit more. The man is more interested in sexual activities. So we have a little bit of a problem here where she very much wants the fulfillment of a natural woman's desire in married life to have a child. She's burning with urge for that. It's called lust. And Kashyap, unfortunately, wasn't strong enough to resist the temptation. And consequently, we know what happened. An inappropriate time, like most of the childbirths in this day and age, most are born out of lust, simply, sexual urge, and they have sex and pregnancy comes. It's not so planned. It's not very carefully planned with a spiritual intention in very rare occasions. Not only that, but then the child is brought up in the womb with all kinds of unfortunate associations, vibrations, foodstuffs, and so on, which he's exposed to in the womb. Maybe liquor, and so many things, and in a situation where there's no peace around it. The family life is not peaceful. There's, all these vibrations affect the consciousness of the child in the womb. And then generally the child is born in a hospital, which is a new thing in society, which is another problem because it's such an unnatural environment to be born in. You're born in a place where people are normally sick. So you're kind of born in a sick environment in one sense. Traditionally, people will be born at home with their family members, the grandmother or a family nurse delivering the child. There was no issues. It was like very comfortable, very peaceful environment to appear into this challenging world, so to speak, for the newborn. But unfortunately, that's not usually the case either. And then from day one, the child is basically bombarded with so-called Putin, like a Putin, a witch. She comes and she tries to kill the newborn child, whether it's on a material or spiritual platform. This is usually what happens. And 99% we're talking material platform here. Material education is all that the child gets. You are the body. You are meant to enjoy. You are English. You are Indian. You are African. You are American, or whatever. Wherever you happen to appear according to geographical definition, you're given a label. And this is your mom. This is your dad. Okay, that's understandable. This is your, everything becomes very self-centered right from day one. The child is seen to be in the center of the world, basically. Element of that is required for a young child, but there has to be education of a higher nature also. And if the parents don't have it, how can they possibly, or the teachers don't have it, how can they possibly share it with a young child? It's not possible. So that's an unfortunate situation the world, and Srila Prabhupada's come in the midst of it, entering into, the West, the Western world, into America, into Europe, wherever, all the places he went, Africa also, to try to give education beyond the bodily platform of life. Religion touches on it, but it doesn't go very deep in most cases. There are always exceptions everywhere. It's mainly fulfillment of artha and the dharmas there, but it's mainly fulfillment of artha and kama, and some vague idea of liberation maybe there, or some hope of liberation, but not a systematic process or program to achieve it in most cases. Vedic society covers that, but it goes much further. Prema Pramata Mahan, we know a famous verse, which is not direct from Chaitanya Charitamrita, but the Vishwanath Chakravarti and others compiled this summarization of Lord Chaitanya's mood and mission. This is a key feature, that the highest perfection of life is Prema Pramata Mahan, is pure love, unadulterated love, with no tinge of lust of any kind. in that relationship. And Anyabilashita Shunyam, there's absolutely no other motive other than Anukulyena Krishna Nushlim. That means pure love, love simply for Krishna's pleasure. It's not just doing things, but it's the mood of only wanting Krishna's satisfaction. That's actually Anukulyena. The process we follow, the process of leading to that of Vaidhi Bhakti, is indeed, you could say, absolutely required for those who are conditioned, those who are still under the influence of the modes of nature must practice. If they want to get freed of the entanglement of the three modes, must practice a bona fide form of Vaidhi Bhakti, whatever their identity may be. This is the process of getting freed. They may follow another path of Vaidhi, which may not be absolutely Bhakti, but it will not lead to the constitutional state. It may lead to a liberation, a liberated state of some kind, like Brahman or something at most. Even then, there has to be a tinge of Bhakti there. I'm just going to mention a very interesting pastime in the 11th canto of Bhagavatam. Some of you have read that. Maybe all of you have read it. I don't know. But there's a conversation there. Don't ask me exactly who's speaking to who. I cannot remember. But there's this conversation there where the 24, the various gurus are mentioned for the living entity in the material world, not just the terminology we normally use for a guru, one who directs us out or to understand our spiritual nature as a guru, and helps us to understand our constitution. He's not one who indulges us or fulfills our material desires, but helps us to become free of them and attached to Krishna. So we can learn from the material world. So one example which was given therein in the 11th canto was of an incident. And these are allegories, we could say, or examples to illustrate the situation which we're in the material world of a pigeon. The pigeon is a pigeon mate, female pigeon, male pigeon. They're very attached to each other and they have babies. And, they have their get together and they have their nest and the eggs come and the babies come and so on and so forth. And they're very attractive to the male and female pigeons, just like they are in the human form of life. They may have a few more at once. So they had quite a few baby pigeons. And one day those baby pigeons were caught in the net of a hunter. So the hunter, a cruel hunter, you could say. But anyway, he caught materials like this. We're all caught in a net. It may be a social media net or it may be any other kind of net, but we're basically all caught in the net of material bondage, various ways, identifying and being attached to our karmic conditionings. So they got caught in the net. So the mother noticed that her little offspring, baby pigeons, they were caught in the net. She was totally distressed and absolutely overwhelmed, and she went to try to get them out of the net, as any mother would naturally do. And she also got caught in the net. So then the male pigeon, also seeing the situation, was also devastated. So we're just going to take it up now when I think he's not in the net yet, but he's seeing the situation of how entangling. He wasn't thinking how entangling, he was just thinking how sad this all is. I've got to do something about it. But he's struggling. The male pigeon said, "Alas, just see how I am now destroyed. I am obviously a great fool, for I did not properly execute pious activities. I could not satisfy myself, nor could I fulfill the purpose of life." There's a kind of a sideline realization there, but he's thinking, did execute pious activities, therefore this unfortunate situation has evolved. People think like that. They don't realize that there's another purpose behind all this. My dear family, which is the basis of my religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification, is now hopelessly ruined. Maybe he's in a net, or he seems like he's in a net already. So the same thing, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification. Everything's ruined now. He worked so hard and everything's lost. Have a Bengali statement, we work so hard to make a nice house and the house burns down, everything's lost. So the whole material life is like that. We work so hard for toiling hard all our life to make nice family and try to make a nice, comfortable situation, pious even. and then we lose everything. We call materially pious. Let's read a bit of the purport. The purport by Sridhar Swami, the original commentator, explains that the pigeon was not satisfied. I'm just paraphrasing. Was not satisfied with the sense gratification he had achieved. Although he was completely attached to his wife, children, and nest, he could not sufficiently enjoy them, since there is ultimately no satisfaction in such things. Akatasya, akritartasya indicates that his hopes and dreams for future expansion of his sense gratification were now also ruined. We all know to some extent what this feels like. It's just so miserable. People commonly refer to their home, sweet home. It's like our nest, it's our security. We feel this is mine. And we try to make it just the way we want to be comfortable. And money is put aside for future sense gratification. It's called a nest egg for future development. Therefore, all of the lovebirds of the material world should clearly note how their so-called wife, children, and fortune will all be dragged away in the hunter's net. In other words, death will finish everything, no matter who we are. In this world, you can be the most powerful person, and you can be your Hiranyaksha or Hiranyakashipus, but they're all going to be dragged away. So that was from the 11th canto of Bhagavatam. So that's just a prelude. We'll just take that as a kickoff. And as we mentioned already, how this net, or this binding situation of the material, well, there's a very famous verse of Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th canto. We get a lot of insight into the situation from Prahlad Maharaj's teachings. Even at a young age, he was teaching the kids in school. Other than sense, they were being educated by their teachers, Sandanamarka, of course. But education, what was it for? It wasn't even Dharma much. I mean, there was some remnant there of, some kind of charity and respect for Brahmins. Some things were there to some extent, but not religiosity. Certainly wasn't their intention. There was no desire or no inclination to believe in a God. Absolutely not. No. But definitely Artha and Kama were high priorities in their education. So Prahlad Maharaj says in 755, Tat sadhu manye suravaya dehinam sada samudvigna diyam sadgrihat hitvatma patang griham andakupam vanam gato yadarim ashrayeta. Famous verse, huh? Prahlad Maharaj replied, his father wanted to know, oh, how are things going at school? What's happening there? And he replies, oh, best of the Asuras, he calls his dad, the best of the Asuras, king of the demons. As far as I have learned from my spiritual master, any person who has accepted a temporary body and temporary household life is certainly embarrassed by anxiety because of having fallen in a dark well where there is no water but only suffering. One should give up this position and go to the forest and van. That's the monkeys if you're hearing anything in the background. So here we are in the van, Vrindavan, in the forest. More clearly, Prahlad Maharaj says, at least Prabhupada translates it like this, one should go to Vrindavan, where only Krishna consciousness is prevalent, and should thus take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's the goal, whether it's Vrindavan or whether it's Harrisburg or Lagos or London or wherever you are, the point is the same, that we should take shelter, or we should cultivate Krishna consciousness and not just cultivate material consciousness and consequent suffering that goes with it. So that's a bondage. A little time that we haven't got time to go into so many detail. But that's the bondage which we're in. So our question is how to cut it. Now, Bhagavatam, or what to do about it. We may be a little bit bound up. We may not even realize how bound up we are until we try to get out of it. But how to cut it? Well, in the Bhagavatam, there's famous verse, Yadana Yasna Karma Grunta Nibandhanam. The Karma it's Karma Grunta, this knot, Nibandha, we're bound up by this knot of karma, which means our conditioning or the way we see things. It's not just some reactions which we providentially receive, but it's also how we perceive and how we react to situations, the subtle aspect, and of course our tendencies behind it. So how that can change to become favorable, so we're no longer a victim of the modes of nature. We're controlled by our conditioning, by the conditioning of others, by the modes of nature around us. How is that Chindanti Kovidas Tasya Kona Kriyat Kataratim? That knot can be cut by remembering Krishna. So the whole Vedic society, including Varnashram, it's meant ultimately to help to awaken our relationship with Krishna, or at least remembrance of Krishna. That's the process. And kamsya nendriya bhatir labo jiveti avata. Jivasya tattva jignasa nartayasti karma veda. Life's desires are never meant or aimed towards sense gratification. The purpose of life is not that at all. The purpose of life is to inquire into the nature of the absolute truth. That should be the goal of all of our work. We can live a healthy life, especially for grihastas. They have to have a certain amount. Most of you probably are grihastas or something like that. And there has to be certain comforts. There has to be certain facilities for the wife and children, home, everything has to be there, economics. These things are there. That's unavoidable in most cases. But they should be done according to, not extravagantly, but according to the need. Live as simply as we can, or need to, according to our natures, and not go overboard. And utilize whatever time we have for that jivasya tattva jignasa, that inquiry into the nature of the absolute. So mostly we see at least nowadays in our Krishna conscious society, a vast majority of devotees living outside, married, children, working, this, that, the other. So they utilize their time. They try to follow a pure lifestyle, chant as much as they can, do whatever service they can. Same things, maybe just less in quantity than somebody who's living in a temple or something like that. And so like that, and with knowledge, the idea is that we cultivate knowledge of the reality of the situation and understand how we can achieve the same objective goal. And largely it depends on association. And Kapila Dev, for instance, in the third canto of Bhagavatam, describes how every learned man knows that the greatest entanglement for the conditioned soul is her attachment to sense gratification. When that same attachment is transferred to the self-realized souls, it is the source of liberation. So association and the proper situation in life are very valuable in that, so to speak. And that means basically trying to follow God's arrangement for things. That's God consciousness. When we put his arrangements in the center and not our own, the more we can do that, the more chance we have of receiving his mercy and releasing us from this never-ending cycle of birth and death, or falling victim to the urges of the senses, from Bhagavad Gita, Kama Krodha Esha Rajaguna Samudbhava, that this is the greatest entanglement for the living entity in this material world, is this lust, the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world, which in contact with the mode of passion turns into wrath. This is the all-conquering enemy of the world, this lust. So we see that happening in this pastime between Kashyapa and Diti. It's lust. Both are becoming overwhelmed by lust, step by step by step. Contemplating the object of the senses, we become attached. Then lust develops and so on and so forth. When lust develops, frustration comes in if we can't fulfill it, and anger, and, the whole thing evolves there, as everyone knows that from Bhagavad Gita. So the whole process is to try to bring the wild horse under control, or by the horns, you take the bull by the horns or something. Somehow we've got to control that lusty tendency, which is born of the modes of passion, which we're basically in. So the Varnashram system particularly is there. Now, it's not so easy to let's say, apply this in most cases in terms of a structured system, both from the point of view of our inability, our lack of understanding how to, the facilities around us, the society we live in. So many factors involved. We're so entangled, we're so weak. But anyway, we can hear about it. Varnashram religion sets aside. This is a comment. Now, where's this from? This is from the first canto Bhagavatam, 13th chapter, text number 24. The system of Varnashram religion sets aside a part of one's life completely for the purpose of self-realization and attainment of salvation in the human form of life. So this is the real point, is salvation, whatever form it takes, but it's salvation from the repeated birth and death, releasing us from the Andakupa, releasing us from this material world, or the bodily concept of life, the three modes of nature, releasing the soul. So human life is meant for that purpose. It's not meant to enjoy the material world or entangle us. That is a routine division of life, but persons, and this is describing Vidura actually, describing the fate of Dhritarashtra. So, but persons like Dhritarashtra want to stay home even at their weary, ripened age, even at old age. They sit around trying to be catered for and pampered by family members or nurses or something or another, with no idea of what anything beyond that, practically, just spending their late life, their twilight years, just wasting their time watching television, playing cards, or talking nonsense, something like that. Degraded condition. And in Dhritarashtra's case, is accepting charity from his enemies, the Pandavas. Very degraded situation. Vidura wanted to point out this anomaly to his brother and impress upon him that it was better to die like his sons than accept such humiliating charity. Vidura wanted to point this out and impressed upon him that it was better to die. We read that already, didn't we? 5,000 years ago, there was one Dhritarashtra, but unfortunately, at the present moment, there are Dhritarashtras in every home. Everywhere you go. Politicians especially do not retire from political activities unless they are dragged by the cruel hands of death or killed by some opposing element. They never give up. People never give up. They're so mad. To stick to family life up to the end of one's human life is the grossest type of degradation, and there is an absolute need for the Viduras to educate Dhritarashtras even at the present moment. So we should try to become a little like Vidura. No, we can't imitate. At least we should try to develop that mood of understanding the goal of life, practicing the path which helps us to realize the goal of life, implying, it's a voluntary thing, applying Vaidhi Bhakti in an appropriate way in our day-to-day lives, according to our Varna and ashram, or activities in life, and try to be Krishna conscious. In the Bhagavatam in New Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada was giving a lecture in 76. He said the real purpose of life is how to become detached from this material life. That is perfection. But people are being educated how to become attached. That is the difference between Krishna consciousness and so-called human civilization. And it's obviously one of the reasons why people in general don't really appreciate the Krishna conscious movement. Probably more than anything else, they don't appreciate it because it's opposed, almost opposite to what they're really planning or what they're trying to establish. Attachments in this material world to sense gratification. They think that's the goal of life, unfortunately. And in Krishna conscious philosophy, at least, does not go along with that very much. Only to a small degree of necessity, but not as a purpose of goal or goal of life, that's for sure. So therefore we become rather unpopular sometimes. So a bit of clever in preaching, one has to be very careful. Prabhupada introduced many clever ways of trying to bridge that, you could say, gap. But the thing can be made very easy. That thing can be very made easy if we attach our mind to Krishna, just like we're actually doing. It is not that we are all liberated persons. We have got so many attachments with family, my wife, my country, everything. But along with it, if we try to increase our attachment for Krishna, automatically there will be detachment. Automatically, without endeavoring separately. A famous verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 127, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Jyoti. Everything will come naturally as we dedicate ourselves more and more to the service of Krishna and become detached from this material world naturally, not to make a separate endeavor. So for sure, Vedic civilization was that purpose, and though some people may think the Varnashram or any structured situation is to facilitate our material desires. But that's not the goal behind it, whether those desires are sex or economic development or whatever they are. The goal behind it is to help us. Yeah, we have to go through it to a large extent, but to ultimately realize the futility of these endeavors and to give them up. But not just give them up, but become attached to Krishna, of course. There's a very famous verse, and this is also Prahlad Maharaj. Yai Maitanadi Grihamedi Sukam Hitucham Matyan. Kandu Yanena Karayori Vadukadukam Tripyantineha Kripana Bahuduk Bajaha. Kandu Tivan Manasijam Vishaheta Diraha. And he says, and Prabhupada lectured on this. I remember him lecturing in Mayapur 76 on this verse. Actually. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Just an itch. A pretty weak, you could say, people in general, a weak definition of sex life, which is their highest pleasure. But here Prahlad says it's just like relieving an itch. Sex life is like a big itch. Grihamatis, so-called grihastas who have no spiritual knowledge, think this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. The kripanas, the fools who are just the opposite of Brahmins, are not satisfied by repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. So that's kind of like a very foundational verse in our spiritual understanding of this particular aspect of devotional life. So Varnashram for most people was absolutely required. It is required for everyone in this conditioned world, basically. Although in Kali Yuga it's not very effectively applied. But the principle's still there. We do have our natures, we do have our desires, and we can't just deny them. And there's some form of accommodation as we have to work. We try to work according to our nature. What more can you say? And these four principles, Dharma, Artha, Moksha, Kama, Moksha, etc., certainly have their part to play in society. Oh. Hare Krishna, water is coming. Release. I'll read something which Prabhupada said. This is from the Krishna Dictations, Krishna book, basically. Prabhupada said, following the footsteps of Lord Shri Krishna, anyone can live with the members of family, society, or nation, but not to indulge in sense gratification, but to realize Krishna. By advancing attachment for him, there are four principles of elevation from conditional life to the life of liberation, which again, Prabhupada says, are technically known as Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. So if anyone lives with the family life following the footsteps of Lord Krishna, he can achieve all these four principles of success simultaneously, making Krishna as the center of all activities. That's the secret. Daivi Varnashram. It's not just accommodation. It's not just progress in terms of human civilization, but it actually becoming Krishna-centered, Krishna conscious, making one's home a temple, seeing one's work in relationship with Krishna, the fruits of one's work for Krishna, everything for Krishna. This is one of the, you could say, missing links in Kashyap's Muni's situation. He wasn't sufficiently engaged in Anukulya and Krishna or Shilanam. Of course, he was some kind of devotee, but he was more mixed with Gyan and yoga and meditation and different things. He wasn't so absorbed in service. And so he didn't get that full protection. We are also ourselves unable, in most cases, to personally control or overcome these urges. It's only by the grace of Krishna. So devotional service, one aspect of devotional service, which is primary, is to always depend upon Krishna, always expect his protection, take shelter of Krishna. These urges will come, and we really have, it's a golden opportunity to call out for Krishna's help. As the residents of Vrindavan, when demons would come, help, Krishna, save us. So like that. Huh? There's another quotation. I thought I got it all in order, but I didn't. Anyway, this is, I don't know where it's from. In the Varnashram system, one first becomes a brahmachari, then a grihastha, a vanaprastha, and finally a sannyasi. So now we're looking at little details of Varnashram. Prabhupada wanted it, but we have it in name to a certain extent. You might be a brahmachari or a grihastha. Perhaps you see yourself as a vanaprastha, or maybe you're thinking of becoming a sannyasi. Maybe you are called a sannyasi. Going to the forest means accepting vanaprastha, which is between grihastha and sannyas generally. By the way, vanaprastha is not for everyone. Neither sannyas is generally only for those who are brahminical. Traditionally, only the Brahmins would take sannyas. Vanaprastha, Kshatriyas and Brahmins. Brahmins may not need, they may be living like that already. But especially the Kshatriyas would take Vanaprastha. Sometimes the Vaishyas, but not so much. They would stay with their family usually. Sudras always stayed with their family. So in Kali Yuga, that means, we stay at home, we try to be Krishna conscious, we do whatever service we can, we try to preach and so on. Try to make our home a temple. As confirmed in the Vishnu Purana, Vanashramachara Vata Purushena Parakpuman Vishnu Arajite. By accepting the institution of Varna and Ashram, one can very easily elevate himself to the platform of worshipping Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ramananda Roy proposed this to Lord Chaitanya, which he didn't accept, of course. One can very easily elevate himself to the platform of worshipping Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, if one remains in the body conception, one must rot within the material world, and his life will be a failure. Society must have divisions of Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and for spiritual advancement, one must gradually develop as a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasi. Prahlad Maharaj recommended that his father accept vanaprastha, because as a grihastha, he was becoming increasingly demoniac due to the body concept or attachment. Prahlad recommended to his father that accepting vanaprastha life would be better than going deeper and deeper into griha andakupa, the blind well of life as a grihastha. In our Krishna conscious movement, we therefore invite all the elderly persons of the world to come to Vrindavan and stay there in retired life, making advancement in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. And that's Prabhupada's purport to that verse. I think that's just a purport. That's the purport of Prahlad Maharaj's verse. That's what that is. I'm going to read something else. It's always good to hear from those who are actually liberated from the modes of nature, those who are above the desire to enjoy sex life, to enjoy the objects of their senses, those who are attached to Krishna. We have the most greatest fortune, of course, of having that opportunity to get a lot, and now even still through lectures, through books and memories and so on, the association of Srila Prabhupada. So this is the third canto of Prabhupada's quoting here. I think it's a purport. 30th chapter, text 8. Family life within the kingdom of illusory energy, Maya, is just like a prison for the eternal living entity. In prison, a prisoner is shackled by iron chains and iron bars. Similarly, a conditioned soul is shackled by the charming beauty of a woman, which is referring to a man, obviously, by her solitary embraces and talks of so-called love, and by the sweet words of his small children, thus he forgets his real identity. That's the verse itself. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, in this verse, the words strinam asatinam indicate that womanly love is just to agitate the mind of man. Krishna's arrangement. Actually, in the material world, there is no love. Both the woman and the man are interested in sense gratification. For sense gratification, a woman creates an illusory love, and the man becomes enchanted by such false love and forgets his real duty. When there are children as a result of such a combination, the next attraction is to the sweet words of the children. It never ends, does it, boys and girls? Even when you're 70 years old, then you've got the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren, and you become even more entangled in their lives. As if everyone's a devotee, it's not so bad. But that's the tendency for most people. They become very entangled in their grandchildren. When there are children, the next attraction. The love of the woman at home, boom, 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 boom. At home, and the talk of the children make one a secure prisoner, unless he cannot leave his home. Even if you want to, and I see so many devotees in this position, maybe that's their nature, they have to sort of go through it. Such a person is termed in Vedic language a Grihamedi, which means one whose center of attraction is home. Grihastha refers to one who lives with family, wife, and children, but whose real purpose of living is to develop Krishna consciousness. So we try to become grihasthas. Problem nowadays also is that, in society, Kali particularly, and society following Kali's direction, has made it such that women have to work as well. And they never used to. Nowadays they do. To maintain one kid, the woman's got to work as well. It's crazy life. They used to have 20 kids and the woman didn't work. And they had no problem. In England, it was like that. My father, 10 kids, and they had no problem. Mother didn't work. It wasn't a big issue. But that's not me, my father I'm talking about. We had a small family. My mother also didn't work, even though we had a small family. But now they all work. So there's no one at home. There's someone got to look after the kids. So they try to employ the parents in looking after the kids, their parents, the grandparents. And this way they become entangled. It's another trap of Maya, trap of Kali. Keep us in this bondage of family life. Grihastha refers to one who lives with a family, wife, and children, but his real purpose is living to develop Krishna consciousness. One's therefore advised to become a grihastha, not a grihamedi. The grihastha's concern is to get out of the family life created by illusion, not to get into it, to get out of it and enter into real family life with Krishna. So, that's the idea. We learn our lessons. We act with knowledge, not in ignorance. Whereas the grihamedi's business is to repeatedly chain himself to the so-called family life, in one life after another, and perpetually remain in the darkness of Maya. This is really the man's responsibility. Woman's supposed to support. We know what happens, but it's supposed to be. And it's the man's responsibility. Therefore, training is essential. The great politician Chanaka Pandit has said, Bharya Rupavati Shatru. Beautiful wife is an enemy. Because every man, Prabhupada sees his wife as very beautiful. Others may see her not so beautiful, but the husband's very much attracted, sees her always as beautiful. If the husband sees the wife as beautiful, it is to be assumed that he is too much attracted. The attraction is the attraction of sex, whatever form it takes. It's not just the activity, but the very attraction to the body and everything that goes along with it, the comforts therein. The whole world is captivated by the two modes of nature, Rajagun and Tamagun, passion and ignorance. Generally, women are very much passionate and are less intelligent. Therefore, somehow or another, a man should not be under the control of their passion and ignorance. And unfortunately, in this age, they are. And the men are no longer men, practically. They're so wishy-washy and unable to protect the ladies. And it looks the other way around in many cases. The women seem to be less passionate and more intelligent in some cases. This is because the men are so weak. It's not because they're so strong. By performing bhakti yoga or devotional service, a man can be raised to the platform of goodness. If a husband is situated in the mode of goodness, can control his wife, who is in passion and ignorance, the woman is benefited. Unfortunately, as we see here in this past, Kashyapa Muni is going to be controlled by his wife. He falls under the sway of passion. The man is supposed to be in goodness, and although he may, let's say, recognize the wife's needs, being in a mode of goodness, he's able to control it and let's say, channel it in a way which is good, beneficial, rather than succumbing to the ignorance. So, in general, forgetting her natural inclination for passion and ignorance, the woman becomes obedient and faithful to her husband when the husband's in goodness. That's the idea. She follows him. Such a life becomes very welcome. The intelligence of the man and woman may then work very nicely together. Nice ideal. Not so easy to practically apply it, but it is a good ideal for both, husband and wife. And they can make a progressive march towards spiritual realization. Because compatibility, so many things were taken into account in the Vedic society. Otherwise, the husband, coming under the control of the wife, sacrifices his quality of goodness and becomes subservient to the qualities of passion and ignorance, which is usually what happens in society, even amongst devotees. In this way, the whole situation becomes polluted. The conclusion is that household life is better than a sinful life, devoid of responsibility. Bhakti Vinod Thakur says it's the safest situation in this age. It's also very good for preaching. Tamal Krishnaraj used to mention that sometimes, that actually Grihastha life is the best ashram for preaching, because you can show by example and you can associate very comfortably with people who are in that situation the world around. But sannyasis were kind of a bit stuck between the two. In household life, the husband may be, but however, if in household life the husband becomes subordinate to the wife, involvement in materialistic life again becomes prominent. In this way, a man's material bondage becomes enhanced. Because of this, according to Vedic civilization, after a certain age, a man is recommended to abandon his family life for the stages of vanaprastha and sannyas. In another place, it's not mentioned here, but Prabhupada says, yes, the husband shouldn't become subordinate, but he also says if the husband doesn't become subordinate, then it becomes a problem, and especially in this age of Kali. The wife becomes the controller and everything. What can I say? Turmoil. If he doesn't submit to the wife, then turmoil evolves. So it's a two-way thing here. But unless Krishna's in the center, it's not going to work, no matter what it is. Let's see. Again, in that conversation in New Vrindavan. So now we're going to go on to the training, and that would be it. Unless we are very cautious, this Griya under Kupam, this family life is very dangerous for spiritual advancement. Therefore, according to the Vedic system, first of all, one is trained as a brahmachari so as not to be attached to sex life. That is brahmachari life, celibacy. So the brahmachari is trained in celibacy, and the girl, of course, is trained in chastity. That's what Prabhupada was talking about, a very nice combination. But where is that going on today? Most of us, maybe if they're born in Krishna consciousness, but there's some unfortunately exposed to a dreadful environmental situation around, maybe a bad example from their parents, maybe a bad example in the institution. So many factors are involved. It's not like an ideal situation of the child being protected by any means. And first of all, one is trained as brahmachari so as not to be attached to sex life. That is brahmachari life. These boys here, these children can be trained. First training is brahmachari, they're innocent. As you train them, they will learn. Train the children as brahmacharis is essential. Purpose is they may not be attached to sex life. Essential but difficult. We all know the problems and how hard it is in our modern society. But that's the solution. Sex life is allowed only to beget children. Another thing, that family life, very difficult for grihasthas to follow that principle. Everybody knows. The Vedic injunction is that a man accepts a wife only to have good children. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Dharma virodho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. Sex life when it is not against the religious principles. According to the Vedic system, sex life is practically denied. But because we are now in the conditioned state, it is very difficult for us to completely deny sex life. So there's regulation. First of all, the training is no sex life. If a young man can remain without sex life, brahmachari, that's very good. If he cannot, then he can get married and live with a wife, but have sex only for progeny, not for sense enjoyment. If the man sticks to one wife and the wife sticks to one man, that is real married life. For most people, that's about it, especially for Shudras. That's the only samskara practically is the Vivaha Yoga. They get married and stay together. They're not going to follow the strict Brahminical principles, but at least they stay together as husband and wife. Then the husband is called a brahmachari if they only have sex for having progeny, which again is very rare. And then the husband is called a brahmachari even though he's a grihastha, and the wife is called chaste. It's what we have to work towards, I guess. Those who are grihasthas. And let's see how much more we're going to gabble on here. A few more quotes and that'll be it. The main purpose, this is in the first canto. Should we read this one? No, I think it's just a repeat, more or less, in different words of what we just read. An interview with Prabhupada in 1976. Prabhupada. No, the purpose is to train a person in brahmachari, not to enter into entanglement. That is the Vedic system. basic principles that don't be entangled with this material energy. You see how it's training Brahmacharya. It's not some kind of how to have safe sex, which is what they educate kids now. Young kids in Europe, some places, they're educating them 7 years old, 8 years old, they're teaching them how to have sex safely so they don't get in trouble. In other words, you're going to have sex, but how to do it without having a pregnancy or something. This is their education. They don't teach celibacy. There was one example in Kansas a long time, maybe a decade or two back. One headmistress of a school refused to teach the course. They said, you're going to fire you if you don't teach it. She took them to court, and it went to the court. And in court, she won the case, actually. But her point was, unless you teach no sex, as well as, okay, you want to teach your safe sex, but you have to also educate kids that they don't have to have sex unless they're married. I will not teach this course. And she won the case. But that's a rarity. It's like, it's one in a blue moon. Kansas is quite a conservative state, I believe. So in general now, they're even teaching kids at 5, 6 years old that they can change their sex if they don't feel comfortable with what they are. There's no problem with that. These things are going on in a modern, so-called educated or civilized society. So at an early age, up to 25, he's trained up. If he can, at least the Brahmin kids, and others are trained, maybe less. If he can continue as Brahmacharya. He can directly take sannyas if he can. Unable, and step by step. Let him become a family man, householder, then on so on. Gradual process. That's the whole idea of human life. Gradual process towards liberation. Hare Krishna. So I could read one more thing, but it's basically the same thread. We could read hundreds more things. Prabhupada has talked about this on innumerable occasions, how important it is, this training. We come into Krishna consciousness, many of us, halfway through our lives, or having spent most of our youth indulging in sense gratification to the max. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very mercifully calm, and despite the fact that we can't follow such regulated programs much these days, very hard for us. We got all of our faults. Kaliya Kalayadosha Nidevajan Asti Heka Mahaguna Kirtanadeva Krishna Shamukta Sangha Parambajan. This Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults. There's no end of problems in this age of Kali. They never seem to stop. But there's one Eka Mahaguna, one great quality. If we simply take shelter of the holy name, then we can attain perfection of life just by chanting Hare Krishna. Of course, following the principles and everything else facilitates that. It's like a support. Without that support, we lose our enthusiasm, we lose our objectives, we lose our strength. And we lose you could say, to a large extent, we lose the mercy which we need in order to attain life's goal, perfection. Prema Pamartamahan. Well, I guess I better finish there. Time's ticking by over here. It's 10 o'clock almost, 9:45. My clock over here in Vrindavan. I don't know what time it is where you are. It's probably earlier in the day or earlier in the morning for some of you. And I will finish at that point. Maybe one or two quick questions. I kind of talk more, not so much on the direct subject of the history or the exact event, but the let's say the related situation which we're all in, and a little bit about how to understand it and how to act in a way to try to get a little release from it, I suppose. That would be the idea. We're all suffering in this material world, birth and death. Any questions?
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Maharaj, as always. The way you share Krishna Katha, especially from Srimad Bhagavatam, is so beautiful. There is lots of weaving from this to that and connecting all together. It's very beautiful. David, if anyone may have questions, comments, reflections, you may want to ask or share, please. You may indicate by using the hand emoji or your physical hand, and you'll be asked to unmute to ask your question or share your reflection. But please remember, Maharaj has to leave soon. So if you have a question, you can ask it now. Hare Krishna.
Countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, Maharaj, I have a question before we get it to zero. I have a question before we get to zero. I remember, thank you again, Maharaj. I remember some time ago when I used to do book distribution in my own little way, there was this book, Renunciation Through Wisdom. It's one of our books. I don't remember which edition, but at the back of the book, there were three women. They were like puppeteers. They were holding puppets and they were manipulating the puppets.
The strings.
Yes, these three women represented the material gods of nature.
Yeah, the three modes of nature. You see that picture in many books. It's in some of the Gita editions and various places also.
Famous. Yeah, three modes of material nature. Now,
representative painting.
Yes, if I'm the puppet and the puppeteer is manipulating me according to the way he wants me to move, the way he wants me to tilt, the way he wants me to dance, how can I do anything on my own? So if I'm a conditioned soul and material nature is manipulating me whichever way it wants,
yeah.
How do I free myself?
You cannot. You can't. It's like you're in an airplane.
Yeah.
Chicken or beef? What do you want? Now they have other dishes, but they used to be like that. There was two choices: chicken or beef. What do you want, love? Chicken or beef? Now you have a few more choices, but you really don't have much choice. You're stuck. No one can get out of this material world. They're stuck, following their conditional natures. There's no way out. You can go up and down a little bit by choosing what Krishna's presence is there in various ways. That's what scriptures are. They're the written form of the Lord. They're supposed to be, as long as they're not changed. And if people, so by their desire, whatever good fortune comes their way, if they're some or another, they follow religious principles, they get benefited. They may become elevated or degraded in the material world accordingly. Up and down they go. But to actually get out of this world, we can't. We're stuck within it. We need help from outside. And that's why the Lord comes, and that's why the Lord's representatives come into this world. They just, we don't have, they make some or another arrangements. Of course, we may be in a position which is somewhat more favorable. We may be in a position where we just feel like we've had enough of all of this. And the Lord gives everyone a chance to see, say, a spiritual opportunity, a spiritual alternative in due course of time. And then you come back, not so much to the karma. The karma may be there in terms of this feeling absolutely fried with their lives or something. And you're in the human life. It doesn't happen unless you're in the human life, usually. But then the choice of the living entity, those who are actually, let's say, good fortune, they choose, okay, let me see what this is all about. And they give it a bash. So the pure devotees give them an opportunity, and the pure devotees' will is so powerful. Our will is otherwise, and the pure devotees' will is for Krishna. It's like Prabhupada writes, by your will, they've all come into this material world, and by your will, they can all be delivered. And Prabhupada says, my will is that you please deliver them. So you've got a combination of wills working here. The conditioned soul, who's a prisoner in this world, who wants to live in this world happily, but doesn't want to get out of it, so to speak, in the real sense of the term. Very rare. And then you get the Lord's will, which he obviously wants all living entities to come back home, back to God, but he's not going to interfere in their free will or their independence. And you get the devotee's will, from Radharani down, is that they do everything they can to reunite people with Krishna, or reunite the soul with Krishna. So their will is very strong. Krishna can't deny their will. So he facilitates people. He gives people the opportunity to at least make that choice. of association and acceptance or rejection is their choice. But at least he gives them that chance. So the will is working. Living in his will is, I don't want it. The devotee's will is, I want you to take it. I don't want it. But it'd be really good for you, trying to sell a book, the battlefield, trying to convince the person against his will almost, to take a book or to chant Hare Krishna by various means, or take prasadam. Something to get that Agata Sukriti started, to get some kind of good, Bhakti and Mukti Sukriti, some kind of devotional Sukriti. Their Sukriti is only, karma Sukriti is only material. So unless there's a devotee, Bhakti is not born by karma, it's not born by legislation, it's not born automatically. It's an association of devotees. So unless the devotees give their association, that Bhakti will not awaken. That's why Prabhupada put so much emphasis on distributing books, and because that remains, and that facility for people to get that association is always there. There's a mission. The mission of the Hare Krishna Moon is to create. One time Prabhupada said, don't expect to see devotees in this lifetime. Our business is planting seeds. He said that. He wrote that one time. He said that in Africa, actually, when I was in Kenya. He told Brahmananda that. Brahmananda Prabhu. I'm staying a few doors from where Brahmananda stayed when he was in Vrindavan, same building. And Brahmananda personally told me that. He said Prabhupada told him that don't expect to see any devotees. He was talking in Kenya. Don't worry, even if they don't stay. He said, don't expect it. He said, our business is planting seeds. Those seeds will eventually grow. Of course, we see that many of them have grown in this lifetime. It's not that we have to wait. But even if they don't, Prabhupada said, we're planting seeds. And Prabhupada said it's a mercy mission. Pure devotees, mercy, planting seeds somewhere in everyone's heart to try to somehow or another plant that seed of Krishna consciousness to some degree or some connection with Krishna consciousness in everyone's lives. It's a mercy mission. That's what the devotees do. They risk their life, like Jesus Christ, Haridas Thakur, Srila Prabhupada. They risk their lives for that, even it's threatening. People working, even so-called members of their own Sangha, are sometimes working against their intentions. But they do that for the sake of others, because they can't tolerate to see that Krishna's parts and parcels are not bringing Krishna pleasure. And neither are they bringing themselves pleasure either. At the same time, they're suffering. The devotee can't tolerate to see the suffering living entities, and he can't tolerate to see that Krishna's pleasure is not what it could be, because he could be more happy if living entities were engaged directly in bringing him pleasure and the Kulena Krishna or Shila. So that's the devotee's strong will. Otherwise, there's no hope. It's just a matter of going up and down from heaven to hell and back again. Krishna can do what he can by Krishna's mercy, but in generally speaking, it's the devotee's mercy that he showers that on others. So that's the good fortune, this particular moment. And of course, in previous ages, in the whole system, the whole society was geared to follow God's will. And if you didn't want to follow it, that was your problem. But the society itself nowadays is the opposite. Society is opposite, geared not to follow God's will, basically. And to try to change God's will if it doesn't fit into our demoniac or sinful desires. Try to change it, compromise it. We don't need to compromise it. We can just be honest and say, I can't follow it. That's another thing. At least be honest. But don't change it. Anyway, free will is still there, but you only have choices of heaven or hell, unless you associate with somebody who has something beyond heaven and hell. You're just going to go beef or chicken. Which do you want? Or a vegetarian, you like a veggie dish, fruit dish or something. But it's all material, People just different modes of nature, 3 modes, goodness, passion, ignorance, up and down, sometimes one more than the other. But you're still under the modes of nature, it's still materialistic. So someone had put Krishna in the center. Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you so much, Maharaj. I have one last question, please, Maharaj. And it's from the purport that Sri Prabhupada so beautifully gave us. This is 3:14:17. In the purport, Sri Prabhupada states that if, however, the husband is progressive in spiritual advancement, the wife undoubtedly shares in his activities, and thus both the wife and the husband profit in spiritual perfection. My question is it equally the same the other way around? In other words, if the wife is progressive in spiritual advancement, the husband undoubtedly shares in her activities, and thus both the husband and the wife profit in spiritual life. I'm asking this question because, to my estimation, it seems to me that we have more women who have more devotion than men. And if that happens to be the case, then the men may also be benefited. Otherwise, there is going to be
hope so.
danger.
One would hope so. We hope that they don't stop their wives from trying to practice Krishna consciousness or something.
Yeah.
It's true, especially I would say maybe not so much in India. India's situation is still a little bit more along the lines of tradition in terms of relationships. I mean, it's changing rapidly, but it's still there. In the West, not so much, as you rightly pointed out. In many cases, the ladies are more serious about Krishna consciousness for whatever good reason. It's a very complicated age in Kali Yuga. People changing sexes even within this lifetime, what to speak of the next lifetime. It's very complicated and society is very complex. So the idea is both husband and wife work together. That's a traditional situation that's mentioned by Prabhupada there, which is idealistic situation. The husband's fixed in Krishna consciousness. The wife supports the husband. She may also be fixed in Krishna consciousness too, one would hope. But even if she's not, if she's completely supporting her husband, traditionally they follow the husband. She goes with the husband wherever he goes. So where does the husband go? Again, it depends upon the relationship and how much the husband is actually, relating with his wife. I mean, if he's actually supporting her, not putting obstacles in her way, he certainly is going to get benefited, even though he may not be so serious in his own practices. Whether he's completely following his wife like a wife, in other words, the wife becomes like the husband becomes like the wife in traditional terms. That's kind of an unusual situation, but why not? After all, in Kali Yuga, both man and woman are seeing themselves as the male. Prabhupada says they're both seeing themselves as Purusha anyway. There's not much of a Prakriti mentality amongst the ladies in Kali Yuga, at least not at the moment. Although it's they could say their natural nature, but most women are more or less seeing themselves as Purusha also. So, and the men are like, as we heard earlier, they're so wishy-washy. When a man becomes under the influence of passion and ignorance, then he loses it, basically. The woman by nature is not anything unusual. So they're kind of in their element. It's like the story of the crocodile and Gajendra the elephant or whatever it is. It's kind of like it's an abnormal situation, but it's okay. If that's the case, and the woman is very serious, the husband's very lucky. He's very blessed and very fortunate. He shouldn't just live on his laurels. He should try to, take responsibility as well. But the worst thing is when the husband forcibly makes the wife, break her devotion or engage in sinful activities. And, we know there's some kind of give and take has to be there in family life. It's not all black and white. That's a fact. You're going to stay together, some give and take, but it shouldn't be like all give. There has to be some kind of reasonable understanding there. and with the same objective goal, even if one partner is weaker than the other. They shouldn't just abandon each other, but some kind of endeavor to help each other should be there. The wife is stronger. The husband should feel blessed. He's got such a good devotee wife, and try to appreciate that over and over again, and become humble. What to do.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. It's 10 p.m. Maharaj time.
Yes, Tim.
So
I got to cut out. I've still got things to do, and we got to leave.
Yes. So I think we'll bring this to a close. Before we do that, we're going to humbly request all the devotees. But before we really do that, Maharaj, like we said
Christmas
initially,
marathon, book marathon's coming up. I'm going to be flat out for the next 5 weeks, 6 weeks till the end of the year.
Oh, okay. All right. But we just wanted to register our deepest appreciation for your presence here today, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Because we understand you're very busy, but you still try to squeeze some time to be with us today.
We're heading back to France in a few days, and then we're getting ready for the Prabhupada book marathon. And I see you've got all your books ready, lined up in the shelves behind you for distribution. You're going to be on the streets of Harrisburg and wherever else you're going, distributing those books like wildfire.
Hare Krishna. So, dear devotees, we're going to humbly request you all to kindly unmute yourselves, and we all chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to express our deepest appreciation to our revered speaker for today, His Holiness JANANANDA Swami Maharaj, for sharing his love and wisdom with us all. Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Vancha kalpa taridascha, kripa sindhudeva Enam pavanebhyo Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. His Holiness JANANANDA Swami Maharaj ki jai. Jagat Guru Shri Prabhupada ki jai. All of us assembled Vaishnava devotees. Hare Hare Hare.